Hello guys and gals, and this is part 50 of our reading of Rod Serling's Twilight Zone, 26 Unforgettable Explorations into the Realm of Supernatural. And it is adapted by Walter B. Gibson. Now, we're going to go over the copyright information, which should be on your screen right now. I'll find it in the book here. Clearly says that Rod Serling's The Twilight Zone is copyright 1963 by Cayuga Productions Incorporated, and Rod Serling's Twilight Zone Revisited is copyright 1964 by Cayuga Productions Incorporated. All rights reserved. This 1983 edition is published by Bonanza Books, distributed by Outlet Book Company, Incorporated, a Random House company, and the address is there if you want it. This book was previously published as two separate works entitled Rod Serling's The Twilight Zone and Rod Serling's Twilight Zone Revisited, and printed and bound in the United States of America, and the Library of Congress information is there as well. We have been reading from the house on the island, and Janice is there, and she saw the woman in gray, and they're going to tell her a little bit about it, because they really haven't really seen much of her. So, let's see. Marcia can hear things that nobody else can hear, and Janice can see things that nobody else can see. So they're going to try to hunt down the ghost. Anyways. You mean she really killed how many people? As many as 5. Her 2 sons tried to take the blame for it, but old Death Nell was hanged along with them. Nell knew what was coming because when the constables arrived to arrest her, she tried to set fire to the house in order to destroy all evidence. Her ghost has been trying to do that ever since. It was Janice's turn to speak in disjointed tones. I saw the ghost of old Nell? The woman in gray, Oscar nodded. When someone tried to reopen the inn, the ghost was seen several times. The mysterious fires broke out until finally the place was partially burned down. 10 years later, they started to rebuild it, and they'd gotten just so far when the same thing happened, another fire of ghostly origin. And it's gone on ever since, added Marcia. Sometimes owners closed the place, but it would still catch on fire. They blamed on tramps, but there are other old houses around here, and nothing like that ever happened. That's right, Oscar acknowledged. Whenever this house became uninhabitable, the ghost neglected it, but just let someone try to put it in shape. Fires everywhere. Fires and everything else would start all over. It was just about falling apart when real estate values skyrocketed a few years ago, and the owners rebuilt it. And we bought it. Now the trouble has started again, Oscar shook his head, annoyed. We've insured the place for what we put into it, but I don't want to be beaten by a ghost. And that's what I call a real spirit. No, that's what I call a real spirit. The interruption came from the front door, and Janice turned quickly to see the real Aunt Kathy. She was a complete contrast to the woman in gray, for she was cheery, energetic, and actually only a few years older than her nephew, Oscar. Marcia introduced Janice to Aunt Kathy and was starting to tell about Janice's ludicrous mistake when Aunt Kathy spread her hands warningly. Just hold it, she pleaded, until Steve has finished bringing in the groceries. If he hears a lot of ghost talk, he'll take off and the way the servants did. During lunch, they resumed the ghost talk, and Aunt Kathy became enthused when she learned that Janice had seen the woman in gray. You are clairvoyant, Janice, Aunt Kathy declared, and since Marcia is clairaudient, we should really lick this ghost business. I know what clairvoyant means, remarked Janice. It's the ability to see things that some people cannot. The way I saw the woman in gray, but what does clairaudient mean? It means to hear things that others can't, explained Oscar. Marcia has been picking up weird sounds all over the place. Last night she thought she heard your car half an hour before you got here. That's why she sent me outside to watch for you. Since Janice was now a fully induced member into the ghost hunting team, they took her over to the sprawling old inn upstairs and down, showing her where raps had been heard, where mysterious fires had broken out, and even a few spots where the gray phantom had been glimpsed, though only fleetingly. I'll bet you're the first person to meet the ghost face to face in the last 50 years, Oscar told Janice in an admiring tone. If we can track down Old Death now, maybe we can put her through the ringer and get rid of her once and for all. It was easy to joke by day, but as late afternoon shadows lengthened and twilight settled over the house on the island, Janice began to have qualms. It was pleasant by the big living room fire, but disconcerting to look toward the dim corner beyond. Yet Janice wasn't frightened. She was only tense, like Marcia, who was constantly straining to hear things, while Janice sought to see them. When dinner was over, Aunt Kathy washed the dishes and Janice dried them so that Marcia could rest in the living room. That was when Oscar entered the kitchen and said cheerfully, "Don't bother with the cups and saucers, Auntie. I had Marcia use the old nicked set so we can leave them for Nell's ghost to clean up." Janice blinked, amazed. "What do you mean, Oscar?" she demanded. "You'll see," Oscar promised. "One thing an earth-chained entity can't stand is bad housekeeping. Old Nell is no exception." Aunt Kathy left the cups and saucers cluttered on the side of the kitchen sink. And they went into the living room where Marcia, her eyes half closed, soon spoke in a faraway tone. "I hear footsteps," now a whisper, an angry, muttering whisper. "It comes from the direction of the kitchen." "She's here," Oscar said in an undertone. "I'll go around the back way, Aunt Kathy, while you and Janice come through the breakfast nook." Oscar started on his circuit while Janice and Aunt Kathy made a cautious approach. Aunt Kathy was whispering, "Not too quickly, Janice. It never happens if you're close enough to watch for it." An oil lamp was hanging in the kitchen, and they could just see it past the corner of the nook when a click came from the direction of the sink, and Aunt Kathy exclaimed, "Now!" They sprang forward, and the cups and saucers came flying toward the center of the kitchen, where they smashed on the floor. By then, Oscar was dashing in from the opposite door. As another witness to the crash, gripped by some indefinable impulse, Janice looked up toward the sink. There beside it, she saw that same gray shape of a woman whose white face and boring eyes were partly hidden by a shawl. An instant later, the phantom was gone, but Janice thought she saw its arms recoil as though its hands had flung the cups and saucers. Back in the living room, all that came under discussion, and Janice found herself being as an enthusiastic member of the ghost hunting crew as Oscar mapped the coming campaign. "We must learn where the ghost of old Nell comes from," Oscar decided. "Between Janice, who can see her, and Marcia, who can hear her, we can do it if we remain constantly alert." 3 strained days followed, during which Janice glimpsed the gray figure occasionally, and Marcia heard strange sounds, which she tried to follow to their source, but without success. Each day, the incidents grew more striking and more startling, or more evidential, as Oscar termed it, when he heard the details from Janice and Marcia. Toward noon on the second day, Janice happened to be out in the side garden that overlooked an arm of the lagoon. The garden was simply a hodgepodge of dried grass and scrubby bushes. At this season, with a few broken rustic benches along an old flagstone walk, it had been long neglected, but the Woodruffs were planning to restore it once they had put the mansion itself in shape. At present, the old garden offered a vantage spot from which Janice could view the outside of the house and compare it with the interior. She was particularly impressed by one third-story window that opened out onto a little balcony with an old wrought iron rail, apparently a part of the original inn that had survived fire, storm, and stress. No matter where else she looked, toward gables, bay windows, or upstairs porches with wooden balustrades, Janice found her gaze reverting back to that single window, which curiously reminded her of a gulping mouth. Its iron rail, a row of jagged teeth jutting up from the outthrust jaw of the balcony. It was as if some magnetic force controlled Janice's eyes, compelling them to focus there. Even more forceful was the chilling thought that this was leading to some climax, that soon she would know just why that window fascinated her. So she gave a sigh of real relief as gathering snow clouds suddenly obscured the sun, transforming the noonday brightness of into a sullen dusk. When Janice looked towards the window again, it had darkened and the iron rail was scarcely visible, so it had lost its ominous touch. Or had it? As Janice was glancing away, she caught a flash of something from the corner of her eye. It was another of those momentary impressions resembling a woman in gray. Eager to retain it if she could, Janice looked back at the grilled window automatically. There, her gaze froze. That block of blackness was no longer blank. Etched in its framework was a life-size figure in gray, the same one that Janice had watched as it crossed the living room, and which she had glimpsed at intervals since then. Now it was in full view again, and Janice didn't intend to let it get away, or at least she was determined to watch where it went. As darkness persisted, Janice was sure she could make out the phantom's whitish face, but the distance was too great to glimpse the sharp eyes that Janice had noted before. Now, however, she saw the figure raise one arm and make a sweeping gesture as though beckoning to someone far away, but Janice wasn't letting herself be tricked by that. Instead of turning to look that way, Janice watched the window steadily, not even blinking for fear it might dispel the ghostly illusion. Then, oddly, the figure itself took action, swinging about as though attracted by something within the room. A moment later, it had literally whisked itself from sight, veering off somewhere to the right of the window. Janice snapped from her half-trance and rushed into the house, calling to the others. Oscar responded from the second floor and relayed the word that the lady in gray had been sighted. A few minutes later, he and his Aunt Kathy had reached the living room and were listening to Janice's story. Her mention of the balconied window brought a knowing nod from Oscar. "They call that the lookout room," Oscar recalled, "because it overlooks the lagoon, but I didn't know the name went back to the time of the old inn. It must have, though, or old Nell wouldn't be haunting the lookout room." Marcia arrived from upstairs just in time to catch Oscar's final words. "That's where I heard footsteps," Marcia exclaimed. "I thought they went past the lookout room, but when I didn't hear them anymore, I started back. Then I heard them coming from the room, but I was too late to overtake them." During lunch, Oscar balanced the two reports and came to one of his well-defined conclusions. "So Marcia heard footsteps," he declared, and Janice looked up from the garden at the same time. They each caught the ghost of old Nell reenacting something that may have been a regular procedure. Janice and Marcia asked in the same breath, "Like what?" "Like signaling to someone down by the lagoon," replied Oscar. "That's where the boats came in from the river. No, noon would have been a logical time to notify accomplices that they would be needed later, say around midnight, to lend a hand in murder or get rid of a body." That brought a shiver from Janice, but fear wasn't exactly the cause. She had attributed her chill in the garden to the cold November air, more than the sight of a gray ghost at the lookout window. Now it was Oscar's cold-blooded analysis of the situation that affected her. More than ever, Janice was anxious to track down the woman in gray and end this haunting. So Janice was pleased when Oscar suggested to Marcia, "Why don't you and Janice browse around the old attic and see if you can dig up some clues among the junk that's stored there?" The attic was above a side wing of the house and it had been boarded up for years, so it did seem worthwhile to look through trunks, boxes of letters, old clothes, tools, and even toys that were stored there. Snow clouds had scattered, and the afternoon was clear, so Janice and Marcia worked by a little window at the far end of the attic, bringing their quote-unquote finds into the light. Very few of the items were really old, except for some candlesticks and lanterns. Marcia was examining a square-shaped lantern with crude glass sides when suddenly she tilted her head and whispered, "Listen, I hear footsteps coming closer." Janice was looking about from one corner of the long, dim attic to the other, while Marcia still stared far away, adding, "Closer, closer, they've stopped now." At that moment, Janice's sweeping gaze reached the head of the stairs at the far end of the attic. The footsteps had stopped, and so had Janice's glance. Both for the same reason. Leaning over the low rail at the stair top was the woman in gray. Again, the wraith of old Nell had an ideal setting, for that end of the attic was very dark and shadowy, just as the gray dress and shawl were conspicuous against that blackness. So did the whitened face and boring eyes stand out from the gray setting. Now it was Janice who undertoned, "Look toward the stairs, Marcia, not too quickly." While Marcia was turning her head slowly, Janice was easing herself forward, planning to approach the woman in gray and actually accost her, to learn whether the shape was wraith or real. Janice's nerves were tingling, but her mood was one of challenge, not dread. But at that tense moment, a sudden shriek from Marcia broke the spell. Marcia, too, had seen the gray phantom. The lantern slipped from Marcia's nerveless hands, and as it crashed, the weird figure vanished. Janice was sure she saw it whisk down the stairs, and Marcia confirmed that with the added gasp, "I hear footsteps going down." But by the time Janice reached the steep stairs, there was no sign of the woman in gray. Oscar came up with another plausible theory when her and Aunt Kathy heard Janice and Marcia. When he and Aunt Kathy heard Janice and Marcia relate their mutual adventure. He felt that the tangible evidence in this instance was the broken lantern. "It dates back to old Nell's time," Oscar said as he studied the lantern. "She could have used it to signal or carried it with her to light up some of her dark deeds. The mere fact that Marcia was meddling with it brought the ghost to the scene." "I think you're right," agreed Janice. "For the expression in those eyes, the woman in gray seemed more hunted than hunter." "Or more haunted," Oscar smiled, "than a haunter." The ghost hunt continued all the next morning, but somehow the edge had worn off. Either old Nell had put in all her required appearances, or the hunters just weren't looking in the right places. It was difficult to tell, considering that even the way of ghosts could seldom be defined. Then on the third afternoon, when Marcia was somewhere upstairs, Janice was alone in the living room when the fire gave a sudden crackle. Looking up, Janice saw the gray-clad figure of old Nell between herself and the firelight. Janice wanted to call, "Marcia, Marcia, come quickly," and in fact those words kept beating through her mind, but she didn't utter them, knowing that they might break the ghostly spell. But when the figure reached the stairs and turned its cold eyes Janice's way, the spell itself was broken. Tingling with wild excitement, Janice dashed toward the stairs, shouting, "Wait! You're not getting away, whatever you are." The gray shape glided up the stairs, with Janice in close pursuit. At the top, a figure met her practically head-on. Janice made a grab for the ghost and found herself clutching Marcia. "I was after old Nell," exclaimed Janice. "Did you see her?" "No," replied Marcia, "but I heard her footsteps. They stopped right here." There was a doorway at the head of the stairs, the only place where the ghost could have gone. It opened into a room just above the kitchen, furnished with an old-fashioned four-poster bed. There was a window in one wall, but it was latched. Yet there was no one in the room other than the two girls themselves. "This is the dead end where the ghost is concerned," declared Janice. "I'm going to sleep in this room tonight." Sleep there she did, while the others took turns keeping vigil in the downstairs living room. So the night passed until the faintest trickle of dawn came through Janice's window. That was when she awakened at the sound of a low chuckle. There at the foot of the bed loomed the figure of the woman in gray. As Janice sat bolt upright, the weird form moved forward, its eyes burning now, taking on the glow of live coals. From the folds of the gray cloak came two long, enveloping arms that gathered Janice into their clutches. She could hear the cackle of the harsh voice. So you thought you could outwit me. You thought you were smarter than those others. You knew they could not escape me when I was alive. But you you felt it would be easy now that I am dead. But I have come back from that realm of the dead to carry you there with me, my last victim. At those words, as those words drilled through Janice's mind, she tried to call out, Marcia, Marcia, come quickly, but she was choking in the tightening grip of those gray arms and could not utter a word. She was slumping almost completely stifled as a gloating laughter sounded close to her ear, and the grayish swirl was all about her, smothering her. The blackness of death was overwhelming Janice Coleridge. Downstairs, Oscar Woodruff sprang up suddenly from the couch beside the fireplace as a hand touched his shoulder. Then he recognized his wife's voice. I heard a mental call from Janice this afternoon, said Marcia. She was calling, Marcia, come quickly. And I did, Oscar. I seemed to hear her call again. So why are we waiting? Demanded Oscar. Come on. They reached a room at the head of the stairs, and Oscar yanked the door open to be met by a gigantic gray mass that completely enveloped him. The room was filled with smoke, through which Oscar fought his way, choking until he reached the bed and wrenched Janice from it. He carried her downstairs clear to the front door, where the outside air began to revive her. Marcia, meanwhile, called Aunt Kathy. Soon both were at windows, shouting for Steve Hargis. But the handyman arrived too late. By then, the entire second floor was ablaze. Marcia and Kathy grabbed what they could, including clothes and blankets, and raced down the stairs to the safety of outdoors. By the time the first firefighting equipment arrived from the nearest town, the house on the island had become a gigantic beacon. There was nothing to do but watch helplessly as the old mansion burned to ashes. And a final tribute to the persevering ghost of old Nell Denby, the woman in gray. As with all such cases, natural explanations were in order. It was obvious that the blaze must have started in a faulty chimney above the kitchen fireplace. That was how it had worked into the room where Janice was sleeping, preceded by a deluge of stifling gray smoke that had given her fantastic dreams before overcoming her as she was awakening. Fortunately, the other persons in the house had come to her rescue in time. The story was good enough for the general public, but all those who had been in the house at the time, the Woodruffs, Oscar, Marcia, and Aunt Kathy, believed the story that Janice told them alone. They had lived long enough with the ghost of old Nell Denby to recognize the vengeful hand of the phantom woman in gray. Oscar and Marcia made out all right financially once the insurance was paid, but they were sorry to leave the house on the island, or rather the few ruins that remained of it. Conspicuous among those was the chimney that had risen above the kitchen fireplace, and there, to their amazement, the Woodruffs saw the trademark of the person responsible. Silhouetted against the whitish brick was the life-size shape of a head and shoulders exactly like the shawl-clad form of old Nell Denby, the woman in gray. And that's going to do it for that story. We finished off the house on the island, and we're going to start this next story when we pick this back up. Anyways, and it's going to be The Man in the Bottle, I believe. But anyways, we are done with this. So, anyways, we've been reading from Rod Serling's Twilight Zone, 26 Unforgettable Explorations into the Realm of the Supernatural, and we've been specifically reading The House on the Island. Anyways, if you like this content, make sure you like and subscribe and ring the bell so you know when I upload. Also, if you want to support me in any way, if you want to join the Discord server, all information will be in the description below. And as always, thanks for watching, everyone, and have a great day.